Hi, I'm Joan Cartan-Hansen. Thank you for joining with us. Dialogue Web Extra. We're continuing our discussion about salmon recovery. Let's go to our first phone caller, Bob in Spokane. Bob.
Hi.
Hi.
I have a question that I fished that area down by Bonneville for over the past 30 years. And one of the things that I've seen constantly for the past 30 years, and I understand all the agreements, is the more fish that get up past Bonneville as a mature adult to spawn, all the way up into the tributaries, the numbers increase each year depending on how many get past these dams. Been watching this, tracking it for 30 years. The one thing that I've always seen and wondered, and I understand this is an endangered species type situation, why is the upper Columbia or mid-Columbia above Bonneville Dam allowed to use, that they allow gill netting, which takes sturgeon, steelhead, it doesn't know the difference from a wild fish to a game fish, and it takes fish left and right at high numbers. But yet we continue to use it as one of the most heavily gill-netted stretches, although we are trying to get a protected species through this section.
Well, let's let the panelists, let's talk about that. I'm going to put you on hold so that you can hear it.
Okay.
Hear the answer. Gill netting.
Not my department.
Yeah. Jim can, I don't know, maybe you can talk to it better than anyone. I can
Well, the
talk to it
relationship
a little bit.
between the commercial fishermen and the ongoing management of salmon is really complicated. It's not just an issue of how many fish the commercial fishing fleet harvested. It's the nature of that harvest that's at issue. There are a lot of estimates of pre-contact, pre-European abundance and pre-European harvest that suggest that indigenous harvest met or exceeded even the peak of the harvest in the late 1800s by what became the commercial sort of European gill net fleets and the rest of the commercial fishing fleet. One really interesting issue that has come up all throughout the Pacific Northwest, coastal British Columbia, and Alaska is the idea of selective fisheries. And one of the topics that Russ was covering earlier is the importance of diversity to resilience and the relationship between resilience and abundance. And those commercial fishing fleets are indiscriminate, as the caller mentioned, particularly when you fish out by the coast, because the stocks haven't separated. They're all migrating upriver together at the mouth. And so you have relatively weak stocks that are being harvested along with some of your stronger stocks. And so over time, you have disproportionate impact on the very stocks that confer the genetic diversity that confers the resilience that is so important to abundance. And there is a lot of discussion, although not so much in the United States because our commercial fishing industry has declined so much along with the numbers, about trying to return to what are called terminal fisheries or more upriver fisheries, where you have a little bit more selectivity. And of course, gear selection is a huge component of that. The caller's right. Gill netting doesn't traditionally have a lot of inherent selectivity.
Okay,
I can add a little bit, Jim.
Oh, sure.
I don't work in this arena, but in cooperating with some of the management agency personnel, I do know that for the Snake River stocks, the tribal net fisheries in Lower Columbia are real tightly regulated. And the amount of fish they can take is based on the estimates of that year's escapement. So in the real low abundance years recently, they're allowed to take up to 5% of the fish. So it's real tightly regulated.
Okay.
And one tidbit I could add there, Joan, I know there's some new technologies being explored just in the last couple of years with new types of gill net sizes, with the attempt to be less damaging and less indiscriminate to these broad species and groups of species. So there's some effort being made. I'm not sure how successful it is.
Bob, thank you very much for your call. I appreciate it. Let's get Jerry in Cottonwood. Jerry.
Yeah. It amazes me that people think ripping the dams out's going to solve all the problems, and there ain't no way that's gonna happen. I mean, hell, it's just like the Russians, the Vietnamese, the Chinese. They're out there getting our fish. In fact, that wasn't too many, well, I guess too many years old. I'm an old bastard now, but anyway, they was down there on the mouth of the Columbia in the 70s, early 70s.
You know, Jerry, oh, we're about to lose you. So let me see if I can. Nope, we did. I'm sorry, Jerry, we lost you on that one. My apologies to Jerry for losing that call. Let me toss out an issue that we didn't have a chance to talk in the program. That's climate change. Climate change wasn't a factor when, at least wasn't as discussed a factor back in 1991. It is now. How big a difference is climate change going to have on trying to save salmon?
You know, I can start out and rely on these true experts to address that. You know, climate change normally means the continuation of the warming trend that's occurred over the last several decades. For whatever reason that's occurring, that's subject to quite a bit of social debate, certainly. But I think everyone can agree that the temperatures are getting warmer. What it means, to my understanding, to salmon runs is of course, warmer temperatures are potentially lethal for salmon stocks of all kinds. Lower elevations, at lower elevations, temperature change will be more dramatic. Potentially dramatic impact at coastal streams where the water temperatures may get quite a bit warmer. For us in Idaho, from a parochial perspective, once again, I think it makes our salmon runs in those high altitude refuges of central Idaho even more important. The science I've seen says that the salmon habitats above 4,000 feet, give or take, are the ones that are likely to persist and remain high quality temperature immune habitats, which means in a soundbite sort of way, Idaho becomes the Noah's Ark of salmon and becomes even more important if we are to preserve this core species for the long term.
We have a number of scientists at the station that are working on climate change and potential effects on aquatic species, and there's really a couple of different aspects that are going to affect salmon. As Tom pointed out, there will be warming water temperatures. There'll also be a shift in the timing of runoff. And there'll also be probably increased wildfire and things like that. So it's going to affect the terrestrial vegetation as well. The two big impacts are probably going to be a reduction in rearing habitat for salmon at the lower elevations. There's going to be a fragmentation toward the higher elevations. But for our fish, probably one of the scarier potential risks is effects in the migration corridor. And we're already seeing some evidence of a shift in timing of when fish enter the Columbia because of temperature. And that really is bad news for us because earlier entry into the Columbia means smaller fish, fewer eggs, a net reduction in production. The other thing we're seeing is that there are in fact temperature barriers that occur in the migration corridor. And when that happens, there either is a migration failure, the fish don't make it to the headwater areas, or they stray into other streams. So there's a net loss again for us. And the final one is potentially expenditure of so much energy because of the temperature shifts and the change in migration in flow timing that they're going to, I mean, these fish have a certain amount of energy to get back to the spawning grounds and successfully spawn. And if those reserves are depleted along the way, then even if they make it back to the spawning grounds, they may not have the energy to actually complete spawning. We'll see pre-spawning mortalities. There's some research being done in British Columbia in the Fraser system that's documenting this now for sockeye up there. They're seeing actually failures of spawning adults that have just depleted their energy reserves because of shifts in temperatures. So there's some real risks there. To add on to what Tom said, as I pointed out earlier, our Middle Fork stocks spawn at the highest elevation of any spring-summer Chinook stock in the world. So those high elevation stocks are potentially poised to really buffer against climate change, and they potentially would have value for restoring populations in other areas of the Columbia, provided that we have viable populations. Obviously, if they stay endangered, they're not going to be of use to recover other populations.
Well, I know one of the things that we're involved in is the tributary habitat improvement, and many of the things that we're involved in will directly open up other habitats besides the Middle Fork. The Middle Fork is not the only group. It's one of several major population groups for the interior Columbia fish, and purchasing water, leasing water, opening up habitat are some of the things that we're involved with now, which are certainly showing some short-term impacts. If you looked at things that we never would have dreamed could be done, but through our collaborative process have been able to get local groups, local landowners on board to come up with some very complex agreements of changing methods of irrigation, putting water in the stream, have streams where fish had no access to now, get into another 10 miles. I'm thinking of one particular project, and you know, you've added 30 CFS from a spring creek. That's going to help.
We did have one email question I wanted to get to. Quick one is, are unclipped hatchery fish skewing the counts of wild steelhead, making it appear there are more wild fish returns than there really are?
Joan, I can start that and ask Russ and perhaps Vince to follow up. I think it's drainage specific. I think this questioner is referring to the Upper Salmon River, where the steelhead fishery is ongoing now, at least for another week. And in the Upper Salmon River, all the hatchery steelhead are indeed adipose fin clipped. There are a few experimental B run, the late run, larger fish down in the East Fork drainage that are unclipped. But I think Russ had some information that up in the Clearwater system, the situation is a little bit different.
You know, again, this is not an arena I work, but one of the management agency biologists I know does adjust the wild counts based on estimates of unclipped hatchery steelhead. So there are some sources of unclipped steelhead in some streams in Idaho.
Right.
It's kind of a specific
I
question,
think
but
it's
we want to make
watershed
sure
specific.
we get that. But we're almost out of time, and I want, since you didn't get the chance to have that last phrase in the during the broadcast, I want to give you the chance. Why is the story of salmon important?
Well, it depends on what story you're talking about. The story of salmon is really a reflection of a set of values that we bring to their management. So it's ultimately proxy for a set of cultural values and what's important to us. And so much of the ongoing conflict about salmon is a reflection of really different thresholds of what we're talking about when we talk about recovering an endangered species, or are we talking about recovering what was their transformative abundance? Those are two very different things. And there is arguably, deservedly, a lot of focus on Judge Redden, his imminent decision, its implications for the management of the Columbia hydropower system and the Snake River dams as probably the most biologically necessary mechanism and the one that would give us the most immediate success in recovering fish, but also because it's the most culturally dramatic, so it's a big story. But this story is going to continue to play out. It's bigger than what the judge ends up determining is legal under endangered species statutes or the specific dialect of endangered species law. And so I think what's important is that, you know, 100 years ago, we applied our increasingly sophisticated understanding of the biology of salmon to the problem of their decline as we were starting to see it. And unfortunately, what we thought was a fish turned out to be this energy system of almost unimaginable complexity. And a lot of the ongoing conflict about salmon is our insistent commitment on trying to make that original story work, in spite of the fact that we have, you know, a century of evidence that maybe those assumptions were going to lead us astray. And to me, it's whether we have the courage to, independent of blame, go back and re-examine some of those assumptions and see how they fit into our evolving understanding of both salmon and what kind of a world we want to live in going forward.
All right. Again, that nature documentary will air. Salmon Running the Gauntlet will air on Nature here on Idaho Public Television on May 1st, 8 p.m. Mountain and Pacific. Gentlemen, thank you all. I appreciate you taking time to talk
you.
an infinitely complex topic that we just barely scratched, but I appreciate you making the effort.
And a great testimony to the importance of public media at a time when their budgets are wildly disproportionately under examination.
Yes.
That we get to do this. So thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us for this Dialogue Web Extra.